The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. We are going to start right on time here in the next 3 minutes or so. Thanks for joining me. I'll go into a little bit of details later, but if you have any questions right now, feel free to type it in the box. I'm going to ask a confirmation question to make sure that people can hear me. Maybe I am. All right, it's 5:30, so I'm going to get us going. Welcome. Thanks for joining me for this webinar. This is a webinar, so it's a listen-only kind of thing, which makes it go relatively quickly because normally I'm used to having some back and forth conversation. The reason why it's listen-only is because the sound cuts out if we have people's phones unmuted, just from breathing or talking or dogs barking or whatnot. At the very end, because we only have a few people, I can unmute both of you and we can talk if you have additional questions. Otherwise, if you could type in the question field, I will check on it periodically. It might take me a few minutes, but I'll see a little notification that you have a question. Feel free to ask those at any time, and I will do my best to notice those and respond as we go along. My name is Curry Gill. I'm with Oregon Heritage. This is the Grant Success Workshop. The format of this is really to talk about good project planning, then a few grant application tips, and then to look at our online application system. So if you're not going to apply for one of our grants this year, don't bother staying for that part because you won't remember it in a year anyway. So that's why it's at the end. I mean, you're welcome to stay, but but I don't know how valuable it will be if you're not going to apply anytime soon. So we are Oregon Heritage. We're part of Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And these are the things that we do. We have technical assistance and funding for doing all kinds of history and heritage work. We serve the entire state, and we fund buildings and historic cemeteries and museums, etc. So that's who we are. So I'm going to jump right into the program. And I know listening to a webinar for a long time can be exhausting. So I'm going to try to keep it moving. So as a granting organization, I spend some time talking with other folks who coordinate grant programs, and we're always trying to find ways to help people be more successful in their applications and have discussions about what are the things that make for a weak application. And we really decided that it was project planning. And either the project is not well planned or they're not conveying that in the application. So the first part of that is why the first part of this is about project planning. So the first thing to think about in your project planning is what's the project, right? So you have an organization with some kind of mission, or you have a property or a purpose, some impact that is going to happen with the work that you do. And it could be this project, or it could be your organization overall. So you have a purpose. Some organizations and people have missions. It doesn't have to be a mission, but everything you do should revolve around that purpose. So then you need to set your goals and objectives based on that. So if you are the owner of a historic property and it's your personal property, you have some goals and objectives around that property, right? You want it to maintain its historic character. You want it to be standing. You want it to be nice looking because it's a commercial building and it will affect the businesses that are in that building. It's a commercial building and it's part of a downtown. So what it looks like impacts the whole downtown. And you want to be an asset, right, for those places. So those are all goals, keeping the historic character and being an asset for all of these different constituents. If you have a historic cemetery, then you're serving the descendants of the people buried there. You're serving the people buried there. You're serving the neighbors. And your goals are to keep it clear, to make it accessible, to make the monuments readable. There are all kinds of goals you might have established in taking care of this cemetery. Having them as measurable as possible is also a really good thing. So this is the moment to, I think broadly and talk to other people and get ideas to think about what your mission and goals are. And I will add, as a grant manager, a measurable goal is really helpful for me, because when you submit your reimbursement request and report, that gives me something to say, yes, they accomplished these things that were in the grant agreement. So usually people think about evaluation after they have planned the whole project, but I actually like to look at it once the goals are established, because that's what you're evaluating. Did whatever this project was achieve those goals? So I like to think about them right next to each other, and then you can figure out how you're going to measure that and incorporate that into the project. So now the project planning part. This is a short version. What I emailed you earlier is the longer version, where I have slides for kind of each of these categories. We've talked about your objectives and goals. Really think about the why and the significance of the place or story that you're preserving or interpreting, and be able to talk about why that's an important place, what the value of that place is. That's where a lot of our applications tend to be weak. So they might be stronger in the details of how they're going to restore a monument, but they haven't talked about why this cemetery is important or why that particular monument is important. So the purpose, need, and objective, that's kind of the why part. Thinking about the audience, I just mentioned a few different audiences for the cemetery and a historic building. For a museum, it might be a particular audience. It could be youth or students or people that live in the community because they're not coming, only tourists are coming. So thinking about who's benefiting, who gets the good end results of this project. So then you have all these goals you want to achieve. So what is the actual project that can make that happen? So often we end up getting driven because we're not thinking of our goals and objectives first. We are driven by, hey, this seems like a really great project to do. And maybe it is, but if you haven't thought about how it fits within your mission and the goals of your overall project, then it might be sort of an outlier project and not necessarily something you want to do, or maybe not a priority. Then you want to figure out, what does this project look like? What does it entail? What does this project do? So I'm going to give you a little example. When at one of our cemetery grant reviews, I got an application, and the brief project description was, people don't know enough about our historic cemetery, and it's important that they understand its historic significance. That does not tell me at all what the project is. I could guess maybe 4 different things that would address that problem. So that's something to talk about when I ask, what's the value, what's the need that you're addressing? When you're describing the project, it's like, keep it simple. It's to install an interpretive panel at the entrance of the cemetery so people understand the historic significance of the cemetery. Once you have your project, you know your goals, and you have this project and you're confident that that project can address those goals, and can talk about how that project can address those goals, then you start building up the details. So what do you need to do to achieve this project? You need to get access through private land to the cemetery. You need to get a debris container out there, so that people don't have to haul it super far. You need to recruit volunteers to be there for the cleanup day. You need to hire a professional contractor to train the volunteers to repair the monuments. If it's a building project, you might need permits. If it's an education project, you might need expertise like a teacher, to make sure that you meet standards. So you really get detailed on your list of what you need, because that is going to help you establish what you have in hand and then what you have left to seek money for. But it also really helps you establish a strong timeline. So then you assess what you need to complete the project, and that can kind of get mixed in with the project details, right? Those kind of feed each other together. But then you assess your available resources. So maybe you have, say it's an interpretive panel for the historic cemetery, and somebody on the board or your neighbor or the cemetery's neighbor actually does design work. Or maybe there's a local design company in town that would give you a discount, right? And that could count as match for your grant. So you assess everything that you have that can already make this project come to fruition. And then you look at that list and you see what you need and what you have, and there's some need still not covered, that's what you're applying for the grant for. And that's when you then start looking for the appropriate granting organization. It's never a good idea to see a grant program and be like, oh, hey, there's grants for that. I wonder what project we could do because that funding is available. You want to say, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here are our goals. Here's what we have. We need additional funds. What grants feed this? And that will bring you better success in the long run for the future. If you have any sort of long-range plan or even short-range plan, and this piece that you're asking for funding for fits within a greater plan, make sure you address that in the application. Just with one sentence is fine. You don't have to attach the whole plan or anything like that unless they ask for it. Then you create a timeline and assign the tasks. The assigning the task might be you're the person that's doing everything, or you might be partnering with another organization, and so that's a really important component. So in creating the timeline, we have a timeline question in our application. We're really interested to have proof that you're going to complete this project successfully, and so we do look carefully at the timeline. The timeline needs to fall within the grant cycle. So if you're looking at any of our 4 grants that are open right now, including the cemetery grant, once you're awarded, if you're selected for funding, the start time that you can start work is July 1st if the agreements are signed, and then you have until May 15th the next year, so in this case 2019. That is the period in which the work that is being funded or is included as match is going to need to happen. And that's how you should set up your timeline. And don't just say, we're going to start our work in August and we're going to finish it by November. Set some benchmarks. So we're going to have our first cleanup, or we're going to have the consultant out, or we are going to, in some cases, if you're doing a roof on a building, that's a short timeline. But any project with any complexity at all, really figure out benchmark moments in that timeline and say when those are going to happen. If they don't happen in that timeline, that's fine, but we want to know that this is an achievable thing. So if we're looking at a museum that's going to digitize 4,000 records in that period of time, that is a lot of records. So they better be hitting some monthly benchmarks that are very high. And that might not, if you're working only with volunteers, things happen. We might say, that's probably not likely to be successful. So we do look carefully at the timeline. And then have your evaluation systems in place. Any questions on that at all? The project planning? It's kind of whirlwind, but in summary, see if the summary is there. It's not there. So there is a summary. I guess this is the summary on the longer version. So you got to get your purpose and objectives, goals done. Know who your audience is, because you're going to need to talk about that in the grant, who you're serving. Be able to describe the project, be able to give details about the project, understand what resources you already have, because we like to see that support, whether it's community support or experience in the project, your ability to complete this project, and then the timeline, and then evaluation. Now, our grant programs, we don't ask specifically about evaluation, but most do. So that would be, if you're applying for more than one grant, that's something to think about. So I'm going to pause for a moment in case people are typing questions, and we will let you type away at that. I'm going to give you like a minute to do that, because last time I did this, I started talking again and 2 questions popped up right when I started. All right. So next is follow the instructions. So these are some tips on grant writing. This is based on our experience with just my experience with the grant applications that come in. So grant writing is about, and I won't read all these, you have these in the handout, you can read them here while I'm talking, but grant writing is a balance of technical and creative writing. So this is something to think about. The technical part is the project detail. The creative part is why you're doing this, what's the need, and how do these meet the need. We do want a little bit of passion in here. A lot of people wonder about hiring grant writers. I think that's fine to do. Our grant programs are very simple though, and you know this stuff and you care about this stuff. So most of the time, the people who are writing it, who are passionate about it, are more successful than just the straight up grant writers. Be explicit. So we want you to delete all the extra fluff and answer the question that is asked. So we have grant reviewers who are reviewing 20 to 50 applications, depending on which program you're applying for. They have to wade through all of that writing, and it is so much easier for them if you answer the question that is asked when it is asked, because they're going to scan through to see, that's what they want to see, and they're going to have to look for that. If they have to search for that, then that is going to be challenging for them. And they might miss it because they're not looking for that they're looking for the answer to the question that they're reading right then. And people say to me, how do you be detailed but not use very many words? And what we mean by that is, if you're going to do marker repair in a historic cemetery, then we want to know what materials you're going to use, how they're going to be applied, how many monuments you're working on, what kind of work you're doing to them. Are they tilted in your leveling? Are they loose from their base? Are they actually broken and you're using epoxy? So that's the level of detail. About how many are you going to complete in that time frame? If you're cleaning them, how many are you going to complete in the time frame? What if you're going to use anything on them? Like if you're using D2 or something on them, what is that going to be? Who is doing it? How are you training them? Those kinds of things. We also want to know what expertise you have involved. That's in the your ability to complete the project. If you have skilled people who are going to review it or participate or train, that's really important. Put in relevant information. So if you have here's another example that doesn't quite fit with the language that's on this, but if you have a project that you're hiring a contractor to do something, and that's kind of what it's got to be, because that you need a professional to do it, and you spend a bunch of time telling us about your organization and how many awesome volunteers they have, one sentence about that would be good because it shows community support for what you do. But don't go into a bunch of detail because you're not using volunteers for this. So using it to convey that community support is valuable because we like to see that someone besides you cares about this thing. But if you go on and on about it, it doesn't really matter in the long run for this grant. What matters is your ability to do project management and make sure they're following standards and that kind of thing. Let's see. Oh, so my highlight on this page is the budget. So making sure that the budget form matches the narrative. So in this grant application, we have in the online system a budget that you have to submit. Hopefully you're going to follow the instructions and put in a very simple budget. So if all the work you're doing is being done by a contractor, you'll have one line item for the cost And then if you have match, you'll have line items for the source of funding that is going to cover the other costs. So we want it really short. Because of that, we would like to see an attached budget that is more detailed. So if you're buying materials or if you have some volunteer time involved or whatnot, we want to see the details of the plan. But that budget that you attach needs to for sure match the budget that you put in the form. And if you talk in the narrative about other grants you're getting or donations you've received or any other budgetary things, just make sure all those numbers match up. When I was writing grants a lot, I don't do it as often anymore, but when I was doing it a lot, we had the budget that we attached was kind of like the working budget. And so when new information came in or another donation or something like that, we would adjust that budget. And I had to be very careful to go back into the body of the application to make sure any numbers in there matched up. Because when we're looking at it, then we're like, well, wait, do they need this much that they asked for in the system? Or do they need this much that they're asking for in their attached budget? Or do we need this much that they talked about in their budget narrative? Assume the reader doesn't know anything about you or where your place is or what you're doing. We do have skilled people. We select people who understand these kinds of projects, but just assume that you're talking to somebody who doesn't know anything. And the proofread. So I care less about misspellings than I do about a well-planned project that meets the goals of the grant program. Excuse me, but I will tell you that grant reviewers, many of them, will score down in they have scoring that they can kind of have it be their own choice. They will score down for misspellings and typos and whatnot. So proofread, proofread, proofread. One really great tip for proofreading and sort of learning successful grants, what they look like and feel like, is to have two people read your application. One that doesn't know anything about it and one that does know what you're trying to do. And a good thing to ask them to do is to say, hey, read each of these questions and the answers, and please let me know if I'm clear and if I'm answering the question that was asked. So don't have them just edit for typos and whatnot, but have them actually edit for content and see if they understand what you're trying to do and if it's compelling. Our grant process is open to the public, so we have a review committee and you can call in and listen or show up and listen to it. So that is a very valuable thing. We do provide feedback for people, especially those who weren't selected for funding. If you're applying somewhere else, ask for that. Most places will do it. I forgot. I was going to say one other thing about that, and it just escaped my head. Oh, that's the other thing. So up to 2 weeks before the deadline, if you let me know that your application is filled in, I am happy to give it some review, some qualitative review. That doesn't mean you'll get selected. I am around for all these committees, so I'm pretty familiar for what they look for. So I can give you some comments up to 2 weeks before the deadline. You just enter the information into the online system and I can look at it. I can't change it, but I can pop in and read it and give you some comments. That's the last of the tips. Any questions about those writing tips? They seem obvious, like follow the instructions, but I will tell you how many people don't follow instructions every grant cycle. All right then. Selecting the right grant. So make sure you read the mission and purpose of the organization and that your stuff lines up. Double check the timelines. And then also, so our grants have guidelines. Take a look at the guidelines. make sure that you want to do what's required of you if you get the funding, because there is reporting and reimbursement request processes. There are processes. So make sure you understand what those are before you go for this. And then I would say talk to grant coordinators. Even if it's not me, if you're going for some other organization, give them a call. They will tell you if they won't talk to you, but most of them will and give you advice, and will even talk through to see if it's the right fit. So most of them want to just help. So don't be afraid to call. And then if it's awarded, make sure you, again, understand the agreement and the guidelines. Make sure you document everything, do everything on time, thank the granting organization, and make sure you stay in communication with them. Again, all basics, but these are things that I see on a regular basis that aren't done. There is a list on the handout I gave you. I'm not going to go through these, but these are other funding organizations you might look into depending on what your project is. And here's the summary of this grant part. So set the clear goals, create the strong plan, pick the right grant program, follow those writing tips, and follow directions. And that will help you get to grant success. But keep in mind that this is a competitive grant program. So we have more applications come in than we can fund. And we have to try to meet our mission, which includes geographic diversity, type of projects. We're trying to spread this money out across the state as best we can. So even if your project is great and you've written the application well, there's always a chance that someone else has written an application better, or the need in that area is clearer and it just doesn't win out over that need. So I recommend you try again. I recommend you listen to the comments and don't give up. Don't be bitter. Can be a frustrating process because you spend a lot of time, but I promise you that most grant reviewers and we work really hard to be fair and take time and select projects with ethically, for sure. So before I jump into the system, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the process that we go through, and then we'll probably finish this up in an hour, I think. If you have questions about the project planning, go ahead and type those in. So here's the process. Our grant programs are competitive. So we have a grant deadline. The Preserving Oregon grant, which is for archaeology and historic buildings, has a letter of intent. That is basically a sentence of intent and a location and the amount of funds that you think you're going to request. If you're doing Preserving Oregon grant, let me know, or just follow the instructions online and you can see how to do the letter of intent. So when the deadline comes for the application, I do a technical review to make sure the budget is understandable and you're asking for things that can be funded and that it has the appropriate match, that you have the required attachments, that all the required fields are filled out. And then if there is an issue, I contact you. If there's not an issue, I mark it reviewed, and then it is available to our grant committee, which scores the applications, and then they come together for discussion. They can change their scores at that time because it's valuable to hear the input of the other committee members. And then we rank it. We also take into account geographic diversity and other criteria depending on which application it is, to then have a ranking that the committee gives to the appropriate commission in charge of that application. That review meeting is the one that's open to the public. And then the commission or committee that is reviewing it, their meetings are always open to the public. So you can listen in or attend those meetings. And then after that meeting, I will notify the applicants about the results. Then if you are awarded sometime in June, hopefully sooner than later, depending on how many grants I'm managing, I'll send out the grant agreements. You get 2 copies of the full agreement. You need to sign both copies and send both back, and then we sign both and send one back to you. The grant guidelines are on our website with all the instructions, but we send another copy of that to you as well. And then you can begin work. If you have any changes to what was in the application, those need to be submitted to us before you do that work with those changes. And then you report at least once during the cycle as a required formal report that happens using the online system. And then you can request periodic reimbursements for the projects if you need to, or you can wait until the end and do it in one big final reimbursement request. And then we close the grants and we ask you to do an evaluation form, and then that's it. Any questions about the process? I should type that up and have it available for people, but it is in the guidelines, so that process will be in the guidelines. I don't need to type it up. I just realized. Okay, if there are no questions, then I'm going to close this out and go to the internet. Let's see. And I'm going to jump into the online system. I'm going to just make sure I still have people listening. Okay, so our online system. If you go to OregonHeritage.org and go to grants, then you can see the applications, agreements, the guidelines, general information, the guidelines, the online instructions, the link to the online system, past awards, and then these bulletins have information on how to do cemetery work. If you click on the OPRD Grants Online program, it takes you to oprdgrants.org. And this is where you set up your account. So do not ignore which browsers are best. Internet Explorer is not ideal. This has pop-up windows, and those tend to not work very well. So we recommend not using that. So these are links to upload the other systems. So if you're setting up a new account, you go to this link. You put in your name and information and email address. And if you're with a city, it's highly likely that your organization is in there. If it is, you can select your organization. If you're a private individual, then you select private as the organization. If you need to enter your new organization, you enter it here. I will get to that question in just a second. So you type in your organization name and type, and again, if it's private, but like I say, you're a business and you're going to do something on your historic property, so that's private, then do unassigned. You could do private land manager too. And then you click that you're applying for heritage grants, and you click that you're not a robot, and then you submit the request. Huh. You're not seeing anything on my screen. Interesting. You should be able to see my screen. Kathy. Well, okay, so you can sort of follow Kathy. Lori, with if you go to oprdgrants.org. If you have a browser, that's so weird. I wonder if your browser just minimized. That's strange, but you can kind of follow through with this. Lori, do you have an account already? With oprdgrants.org. Have you set up an account already? I really want to figure out how you can see this. Have you not seen any of this at all? The whole time? I've been talking. Wow. I'm so sorry. I'm not quite sure. Okay. So, you can listen if you want, Lori, or you can log off, or you can try to follow, but you're not going to be able to log into the system because you don't have a password set up yet. So once you submit your request from the oprdgrants.org, you click on this link. It takes you to the place to set up your account. A human has to approve this request, so don't assume that it will happen automatically. I don't know if you can see that, Lori. Kathy couldn't see either, but it was hidden behind another page, so there might be more than one window open on your desktop. Okay, good. Yay. Thank you. So, okay. So this is the page where you're logging in and entering your information. You enter this information. If you don't have an organization already, or you're not a private individual, if you're private, you can select private as organization. But if you check this, my organization is not on the list, you enter the name, the type of organization, click that you're applying for Heritage Grants, click I'm not a robot, click submit request. Then I go in and approve the account, which means it has to be during working hours on weekdays. So don't wait until the last minute to do this before you want to apply. And then I will set up your account, and you will receive an email from this system, this online system, which means it could potentially land in your junk folder. So you might check your junk folder if you don't get this. If it's on a work, like regular work hours, you should get it within a few hours, because I don't sit on this and wait for it to come in. When you see that email, it'll say you only have 24 hours to follow the link to set up your password. So I will show you how to get your password if you miss that email. So once you've requested your account, you never have to go to this link again. You go up here to sign in, which is in the upper right corner. Sometimes you have to scroll down to see this, depends on your screen resolution. So you go to sign in. Your username is always the email address that you registered with, the full email address. If you missed that link, the 24 hours of that link, or you forget your password, you can just click forgot password and it will send you a new one. So and it does it almost immediately. So within 5 minutes, you should see it. So then you get your password, and this is where you always come back in to enter. So once you're in, you might have more than one organization you're connected to, or you might only have one. If you only have one, you might come in and it'll be with a white background like this. You need to click on it so it gets a blue background. Okay, because that's what allows you to see your applications. So then you go to this red box where there are 4 new applications available because this is private. We have 4 grants that private people can apply for. I'm going to select the cemetery grant. This date is the day after the actual deadline. For our system, this is the day that it closes. So at midnight, on like the morning of the 3rd of May is when it closes. Just so listen to the guidelines for the deadline. So I have said I want the cemetery one. Now you might log in later and you'll see you have 2 applications, no projects, 1 person. So this is where you never have to click on this again. You always come back in here to see your application. So this is a new one. So I'm going to start this. And once you're in, this is what the application looks like. In order to enter any information, you have to click edit all the time. Sometimes, if you leave it sitting for a long time, this will time out and it will save, and then you'll have to click edit again. If you leave it for a really long time, it will log you out. So you'll go to the home page and it'll say log out. So click log out and sign back in again. So always edit. Then we have these categories, and anytime you see a red exclamation point, that means there's something in there that's required that you have to fill in before you can submit the application. Let's see here. You can still apply. Anybody can apply for the cemetery grants. As a special district, you're eligible. So red exclamation point means there's something required that you have to do or you can't submit. So I'm going to click edit, and I'm going to go start out with project information. The project name is what we're going to reference and what I have to memorize, so I like to keep it very simple. Monument repair at Jones Cemetery. Okay. That's not what I meant to do. I'm not going to take time with a bunch of corrections. So then, again, keep it simple. Repair approximately 12 monuments. And then this start date has to be within that grant cycle that I told you. So I have to make sure that I start it after July 1. And then the end date has to be after the start date. Okay, and then the site name doesn't matter a whole lot, but we have some cemeteries here, so just do the cemetery name. This is a shared system with Parks and Recreation grants, and so they do have big sites that have different names. Then put the nearest incorporated city or town that you have. So I'm going to do Jones Bill. And then you do the county. So I'm just going to say Deschutes because it's there. And then site description. Oh yeah, that's not required anymore. You don't have to put anything in there, or you can. It doesn't matter to me. Site acreage, if it's less, you can only use round numbers, and if it's less than 1 acre, then just put 1 acre. Then latitude and longitude, you can't type these numbers in. You have to use this button. And this is where people have trouble. So if you click on this button, we get a pop-up window. If you're using Internet Explorer, it probably won't work. If you have a high resolution screen, then you probably can't see this stuff below. So often this line of instructions is covered, right? So you have to scroll down. And here I even had to scroll down to see my command buttons. So this is like, never mind, I don't want to work on this right now. So I'm going to scroll back up here. So you use the map, you click on the map, you get the little hand, and you can move. If you hold down your button, you can move the map around, okay? So you find the place you're going to land. I'm going to land in Fossil. And you kind of keep putting that to the middle of the page, and you have to zoom in a lot. So I lost Fossil. There we go. Okay, so in the middle again. And I'm going to keep zooming in. So, and it's a crazy amount of zooming. Just keep going. And as soon as this thing turns green and tells you you can drop a pin, you can. Boy, this is making me zoom in more than there we go. Okay. So then you find your place. So let's say it's the school gym right there. So if that's the right spot, you click save. If it's not, you click never mind, and it'll close the window. So once this turns green, you'll be able to click save, and the save button appears and the lat long appear. Click save and it fills it in. And now that box should be green. And you can open and shrink them by clicking on them. So contact information, you can have more than one person. Like if you have a financial person that would also be a contact, you can do that. They just have to have an account, and you can select them from the drop-down. This is the other challenging place where people have financial questions. The online instructions have an example of what this should look like. I beg you, please, to just look at that and follow it step by step. It will make your life easier. So in the financial information, these fill in automatically from what you enter in the project budget worksheet. And right now, I don't have anything entered. So to enter something, you do add worksheet item. Now the instructions say enter all of your costs first. So I'm going to say contractor. Whoops. Contractor. And I know that's spelled wrong, but I'm going to keep this moving. I'm going to say it's $3,000. Okay. Now I might be matching this with some of my money, but right now I'm just entering costs. So I'm going to add this item, and it appears here as a cost. So the project budget cost of $3,000. I now have a total cost of $3,000, and I haven't shown any matching support. So I'm requesting $3,000. Now I'm going to add another item. I'm going to say volunteer time. You could also call this lawn debris or something like that, or debris removal or something like that. And I'm going to say I have 1,000 hours or $1,000 worth of volunteer time. If they're doing their profession, it can be at their professional rate. So if you have an arborist who's going to work in the cemetery for you and they're donating it, they can use their professional rate for the match. If they're not professionals and they're out raking and whatnot, then that is Oregon minimum wage for the area of the state that you're in. So we're entering all the costs. Now, volunteer time doesn't seem like a cost, but it's a cost. If those people weren't doing it, you'd have to pay somebody to do it. So it needs to be entered as a cost item. Okay. Then we're going to say materials and equipment. Now, it could be that some of the materials are gravel and some of it is fence posts, right? We're going to say that costs $2,000. So we now have a total project cost of $6,000. But I have people giving me some time and some money. So I'm going to say my volunteer time, because I can't pay you for the volunteer time. You leave this blank because this is a donation of volunteer time. It's not a cost at this point because we've already entered it as a cost. We say it includes match. It's $1,000. And we'll say it's the Boy Scouts. Add item. Okay. So now we have a $6,000 project. We have total match of $1,000 right now, and so we're asking for $5,000. So now let's say that somebody's going to donate the gravel. We're going to say it's an in-kind donation. Gravel. And we're going to say it's $500 worth. Well, let's keep it round. Let's say it's $1,000 worth. That's what half of the materials were. Oh, no, I leave that blank, sorry. I click this, and then I do the $1,000. And we're going to say the company, gravel company. And spell it correctly, and then add item. Uh-oh. Well, we just had a funky error, so I'm going to save this and edit again. Add worksheet item. In-kind donation. Oh, dang it, I did that again. 0. There we go. So you'll probably do that too. Company. Add item. All right. So now we have $2,000 in match. We could add another worksheet item and say grant, because some local organization, the Rotary is giving us a $500 grant. And this time it's a grant. And if you have these details, put them in, but otherwise just don't bother because they don't have a red asterisk, which means they're required. And we're going to say we know we have it, so it's approved. We add item. Okay, so now we have $2,500 in match being subtracted from our total budget of $6,000. We're requesting $3,500. Is that good? The supplemental part is the narrative. You can definitely, like these questions are in the grant guidelines. If you want to type them up in a Word document and then just copy and paste into here, you can totally do that. They're just the questions, and you can just type. You can copy and paste, or you can type, and you can go long. Just keep in mind we have to read it. There's no really nice formatting. There's not formatting at all. It's terrible formatting. So don't worry about it. Everyone is in the boat with you on that. This one will always have a green check. I did not make the questions required, but you should answer all the questions. Then the last thing to do is attach the attachments. Now, right now we have 2 required attachment types for this application. Different applications have different requirements. For attachments, no matter what you're doing, a picture of the cemetery is a really good way to go. So pictures are good. You can attach in any format. We prefer picture ones like JPEGs or TIFFs because we use these images. So you need an attachment for this category and for budget detail and estimates. So you can attach a detailed budget that lists out all those materials and equipment, or lists out what the contractor is paying for. You can also attach estimates or bids that you have for work that you're being done. So here's how you add an attachment. You do add, you do browse, you go search your files and whatnot for a picture or a document. It can be a PDF or Excel spreadsheet for the budget. And then you pick which category this is related to. So I'm just going to say it's the attachments category. And then you have to do this. You have to label it for, and you have to do the description. So we're going to say cemetery entrance. We're going to add that. And then it shows up here. And you could have 5 attachments under the attachments category. You can delete it doing this. It's not saved until you save it, so I'm going to go save. And then I'm going to edit again. And then I'm going to add some sort of budget attachment. The koala bear is cute, so I like to use him. And this time it's the budget. And I'm going to say it's the estimate. And I'm going to add the file. Now, the better you label these, the nicer it is for us, because we see these and then we know what we're getting into. And then we can save. Now, at this point, I could submit this. I'm not going to because I don't want to deal with it, but all these checks are green, so that means I can submit. These 3 files are informational. I have the online application instructions and the grant guidelines on here. So if you want to go pop in and see some instructions, you can do that and it will open as a PDF for you. Okay. Once you click submit, a little green bar will come up that says submit. And then when you are out here, the status will say submitted. If it says reviewed, that means I've done the technical review and it's fine. I didn't have to contact you to change it. If it's editable, you can still go in and make changes. So it needs to say submit before the deadline comes. You can log out and come back in and go back in here and enter, click edit, and add more information or add an attachment you forgot to do, and it will all save. If you need help during this process, I can see the applications, so you can look at them, or you can call me and I can see at the same time you can see it. Usually where I end up needing to do that for people is in this budget section. People get very confused here. So it's totally fine. Call me if you need help or email me, and I'm totally happy to help. If we end up selecting your project and we have signed agreements, then it becomes a project, and I will do a training for those who get funding on how to do the reimbursement request and the progress reports. Are there any questions? All right, I see a question. So if you, okay, so Lori's question was, how would you know if you have an account? I can look, you can email me and ask me, or you can go ahead and submit under your email address because you're going to want an account for your address. And I can look up, your organization will be in the drop down of organizations. And if it's not, then you can just say, my organization is not on there. So there's a little drop down that lets you select. And if it's in there, I double check anyway, so don't worry about it. If you say we're not in there and you are, I'll just connect with you and ask you. All right, any other questions? I'll let you type, but while you're typing, if there are other questions, thanks so much for joining me tonight. I hope it was helpful. Please feel like you can contact me for help at any time with this. I prefer people ask for help than just stay frustrated. So thank you though, because it is helpful when people come to this. I do see success rates go up. So I appreciate you taking the time to do it. I'm glad to hear that you were glad to not have to come to Salem. It does justify us getting to do these and also getting to do them at different times of day. So noted. I appreciate that. All right. I am going to sign us off and have a good rest of your evening. All right. I'm glad it was helpful. Take care.